In the glittering world of Newport's Gilded Age, where fortunes were flaunted beneath crystal chandeliers and whispers could ruin a name, one woman dared to exist in silence. Anna Hayes was the governess no one noticed. Too plain, too modest, too easily dismissed. But fate is rarely gentle. When a widowed magnate chose her as his wife, society erupted in scandal. Was it convenience, or something far deeper, hidden beneath layers of duty and desire? This is a tale of betrayal and courage, of love born in the shadows and tested in the fire. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what is it about period romances that captivates your heart the most? Newport, Rhode Island, summer of 1890. The sun lingered above the Atlantic, casting golden threads across the rippling waters and bathing the marble mansions of Bellevue Avenue in a radiant glow. Within these temples of excess, the season had begun. Carriages rolled past wrought iron gates, silks rustled like whispers of wealth, and crystal laughter spilled from porches wrapped in ivy and scandal. But not every figure moved under the gaze of admiration. Anna Hayes stood at the edge of it all, present yet unseen. At 28, she had long abandoned the illusions of youthful admiration. She had served as governess to the Hawthorne children for 4 years, and in all that time, not once had she been invited to sit in the drawing room when guests arrived. She entered through the back, walked softly through the corridors, and remained invisible even when standing in plain sight. Her dresses were serviceable but clean, simple, high-collared cotton gowns in shades of pale blue or ash grey. Her chestnut hair, always swept into a neat low chignon, had never known the touch of diamond pins or imported perfumes. She wore no jewels, but a faded cameo brooch once belonging to her mother, its once ivory relief now yellowed with time. To the society women of Newport, Anna was not a threat, she was a shadow. Yet there was strength in her silence, a dignity that set her apart from the fluttering beauties who performed their charms like birds in a gilded cage. When she walked the manicured gardens with the children, her voice was low and melodic, her hands graceful, her gaze steady and unfaltering. She read poetry aloud beneath the linden trees, embroidered by moonlight, and kept a journal of verses she would never show. The loneliness of her life did not embitter her, it refined her. The Hawthorne family was hosting their first garden fete of the season, and Anna had been summoned to keep the children occupied near the hedge maze. Her presence was tolerated only because it served a purpose. Behind her, parasols bloomed like peacock feathers across the lawn, and the air hummed with the scent of roses, champagne, and gossip. Gilded men in cream waistcoats and gold fobs escorted perfumed women whose gowns glimmered with imported beads, their laughter sharp as cut glass. Anna watched them from the shadows of the rose arbor, her gloved hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. It was there that she first saw him. Henry Sinclair. He had arrived unannounced, and his presence alone was enough to silence the lawn for a breathless moment. He was not merely rich, he was new rich, the kind of power that came not from inheritance, but from the grit of steel, the sweat of empire. At 43, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver at his temples and a commanding presence that made even the established titans rise to greet him. Dressed in a perfectly tailored ivory linen suit with a pale blue cravat, he moved through the crowd not as a man among equals, but as one accustomed to commanding trains, cities, and now Newport. He held his son's hand. A solemn child of perhaps 6, with dark hair and searching eyes. Behind them trailed a young girl in a lace-trimmed dress, her golden hair curling beneath a straw bonnet. She kept close to her father but looked around with hesitant curiosity. Anna did not mean to stare. But something in Henry Sinclair's presence unsettled her. It was not his wealth nor his fame, but the restraint in his manner, like a man armored against sentiment. His gaze swept the lawn, polite but detached, until it landed, briefly, on her. Their eyes met. She did not drop her gaze, he did not smile, but something passed between them, faint, fleeting, like a breeze brushing the spine of a closed book, a flicker of awareness, of mutual recognition, though neither spoke nor moved. Then a servant arrived to escort the children to meet the Hawthorns. Henry turned away, and Anna lowered her eyes, pretending to adjust the ribbon of the youngest boy's hat. She felt the warmth in her chest, long after he had vanished into the crowd. That evening, as twilight fell over Newport and the last of the guests departed in their carriages, Anna remained behind in the garden, watching the stars emerge between the branches. Somewhere in the estate the music still played, waltzes and laughter, the eternal songs of a world that would never invite her in. But she was no longer entirely certain that she wished to belong to it, because for one brief, electrifying moment, a man who could have had the world had looked at her as if he saw something, not lace or jewels, not a fortune, but something else. And that, she told herself as she returned to her modest room above the kitchen wing, was more dangerous than desire itself. The morning air in Newport carried the scent of salt and roses, drifting lazily through the open windows of the Hawthorn estate. The rhythm of the household continued as always, silver polished, linens pressed, orders whispered between maids and footmen. But for Anna Hayes, this morning felt different. The world outside her window seemed suspended, as if holding its breath for something she could not yet name. She had awoken early, as was her custom, and assisted young Edward Hawthorn with his lessons before breakfast. Her voice, calm and measured, guided the boy through lines of Latin, while the distant hum of carriages reached them from Bellevue Avenue. Another social luncheon, another garden tea, another parade of silks and secrets that Anna would watch from the shadows. But when a footman appeared, stiff-backed and uncharacteristically nervous, to inform her that Mr. Henry Sinclair requested a private word in the south drawing-room, Anna felt a tightness in her chest that she could not explain. She adjusted her cuffs with care, smoothing the dove-grey muslin of her morning gown. She did not ask questions. She simply descended the staircase in silence, her footsteps swallowed by the thick Persian rugs that lined the Hawthorn halls. The south drawing-room, reserved for formal calls, stood bathed in pale light. Tall windows opened onto the rose terrace, and in the centre of the room, standing near a Chippendale chair he had not taken, waited Henry Sinclair. He turned when he heard her enter. For a moment neither spoke. She curtsied with graceful restraint. "Mr. Sinclair?" He inclined his head. "Miss Hayes." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was charged. His eyes searched hers, and she, though steady, could feel the tremor in her hands. "You may be wondering," he began, his voice low, "why I've asked to speak with you. I promise I shall not waste your time." Anna nodded once, her posture formal, guarded. She sensed instinctively that whatever he was about to say would not be small. Henry walked slowly toward the fireplace, but did not face it. He stopped halfway, then turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "I am in need of a wife." The words fell like a stone in a quiet lake. Anna blinked. For a heartbeat she wondered if she had misunderstood, but he continued, his voice calm, as if discussing business. "Society here, and beyond, expects me to remarry. They say it's improper for a man in my position to raise children alone, particularly when their mother is so recently lost." A flicker of shadow passed through his gaze, but it vanished before she could interpret it. "I have neither the patience nor the interest to pursue courtship. I do not care for scandal, and I will not marry a woman who expects affection I cannot offer." Anna's lips parted slightly. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm not sure I understand." "I believe you do," he said quietly. He took a step closer. "You are a woman of dignity, intelligent, kind to children, discreet, and perhaps most importantly, you are not ambitious in the way some women of this society are. You've never played at coquetry. You do not chase invitations or titles. I admire that." Anna felt her breath catch. The flattery was subtle, but it was real. and yet what followed made her blood stir. "I am proposing a marriage of convenience," he said simply. "You will have your own quarters, your own freedom. You would become mistress of my household, receive a generous allowance, and be treated with all the respect due to my wife. In return, I ask that you offer the children a steady presence, maintain appearances during the social season, and expect nothing more than what is offered." There was no softness in his tone, no romance, no promise of love. Anna stood motionless, her pulse quickening. She had never been kissed, never received a letter scented with cologne. Her life had been one of obedience, of quiet sacrifice. She had buried a brother and a mother without tears because women like her were expected to endure without complaint. Now here stood a man who could have chosen anyone, any glittering beauty of Newport, and he was offering her marriage. Not for love, not for passion, but for something rarer, respect. She lowered her eyes for a long moment. "You understand," she said slowly, "that this would be a scandal." "Undoubtedly," Henry replied. "They will mock you. They already do. But you have never allowed their opinions to shape your worth. I believe you will weather it far better than most." Anna lifted her gaze. "And the children? I believe they will come to trust you. In time." She folded her hands before her. "You ask a great deal. I offer much in return." Anna did not speak again for a long while. Her thoughts raced through years of quiet solitude, of rooms where she had never belonged, of the ache to be part of something, even if imperfect. And something in his eyes beneath the coldness told her this man had also known silence, also known emptiness. Finally she nodded. Once. "Yes," she said softly. "I will marry you." Henry did not smile, but something in his shoulders eased, as if a storm had passed. "Thank you, Miss Hayes. When shall it be?" "Soon." Quietly. That was all. He bowed, she curtsied, and he left as he had come, in silence. The news, once whispered across drawing rooms and porches, exploded like wildfire. That the mighty Henry Sinclair had chosen her, plain Anna Hayes, a governess with no fortune and no pedigree, was a scandal of such proportions that it eclipsed even the latest engagement of Agatha Remington's niece. Agatha herself was incandescent with rage. In the salons of Newport she spoke with saccharine disdain. "Poor Mr. Sinclair, grief makes fools of even the most powerful. I suppose a governess is easier to control than a woman of rank." Others laughed behind gloved hands. "A governess? How quaint. Perhaps next we'll see a chambermaid crowned queen." The invitations stopped arriving. The florist refused Anna's order for a modest bridal bouquet. Seamstresses declined her fittings with polite excuses. The tailor charged Henry double for his morning coat, but none of it reached Anna's heart. On the morning of the ceremony, she stood alone in a small chapel near the cliffs, dressed in an ivory muslin gown that she had altered herself. Her hair was pinned simply, her hands trembled only once as she clasped them before her. Henry arrived precisely on time. He wore a light grey frock coat and a white cravat. He did not take her hand until the priest motioned for them to join. Their vows were spoken clearly, no tears, no tremors. When the final words were uttered and the gold ring slid onto her finger, Anna looked up at her new husband. His eyes were steady, grave, and yet behind them something flickered. Not affection, not joy, but recognition. They were not lovers, not yet companions, but they were bound now, not by desire, but by a mutual, unspoken need. Outside, the wind swept over the sea, tugging at the hem of her gown as they stepped into the waiting carriage. As they rode away from the chapel, Anna kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had crossed a threshold, not into happiness, not yet, but into something real. And for the first time in many years, she felt the weight of her own destiny resting in her hands. The Sinclair estate rose from the cliffs like a monument to progress, its white stone walls catching the morning light, its manicured lawns sloping toward the sea with studied elegance. It was a house designed to impress, to command, to silence doubts. But for Anna, stepping through its grand doors as Henry Sinclair's new wife, it felt more like entering a vast and silent cathedral, where she was expected to remain reverent, invisible, and alone. The wedding had passed in a hush. No orchestra, no petals strewn across aisles, no procession of eager guests. Only a modest chapel and the distant crash of the sea, bearing witness to a union that society refused to bless. And now Anna stood inside her husband's home, no longer a governess, but not yet a wife in the eyes of those who truly mattered. The housekeeper, Mrs. Cresswell, received her with a strained smile, bowing just deeply enough to show respect, without affection. The maids followed suit, watching her with wary glances, unsure of how to address this woman who had arrived without fanfare, yet bore the Sinclair name. Anna did not flinch. She returned their nods with poise, her eyes calm, her voice steady. She requested nothing extravagant. She asked for no special treatment. Instead, she moved through the household quietly, listening more than she spoke, noting which servant limped from a bad knee, which footman stammered when nervous, and which housemaid cried softly after supper. She saw everything, not with the cold scrutiny of a mistress, but with the quiet attentiveness of a woman who had once stood in those very shoes. The children were introduced to her formally on the second day. James, only 6, was shy but curious. He looked up at her with wide eyes and gripped his nurse's hand tightly. But when Anna knelt to his level and offered him a small wooden toy, a soldier she had carved herself, his fingers loosened. He took it without speaking, then offered a shy smile that melted something inside her. Lillian, older and sharper, held herself like a little lady of Newport. Her pale blue dress was pressed to perfection, her curls arranged in neat ringlets. When Anna addressed her, Lillian curtsied but said nothing. Her green eyes, so much like her father's, held no warmth. "She prefers her governess," Henry said that evening over dinner, as if offering a report on livestock. "Miss Penley was with us for 3 years before the illness." Anna nodded, but did not reply. Henry had returned home late, dressed impeccably but wearied by meetings and letters. He ate sparingly, spoke only when necessary, and never once asked how she had spent her day. The dining room, with its gleaming mahogany table and crystal chandeliers, echoed with emptiness. Anna retired to her room, not his, and stood before the tall mirror, unpinning her hair with slow, deliberate hands. The muslin nightgown she wore brushed her ankles, the fabric plain but soft. She stared at her reflection for a long time. The woman looking back was calm, composed. But behind her eyes burned questions she dared not voice. Why had he chosen her? Why this cold arrangement, this polite silence? Was she merely a placeholder in a household that had not finished grieving? The days passed with measured precision. Anna awoke early and took her breakfast alone in the solarium. She began organizing the children's lessons with their tutors, observing first, then suggesting subtle adjustments that improved both discipline and curiosity. James began to follow her through the garden, clutching her skirts and asking about birds, clouds, and everything in between. He laughed freely in her presence, and once even took her hand without prompting. Lillian remained distant. She watched from doorways, her small mouth set in a line of polite defiance. Anna did not push her. She simply existed, present, dependable, never forcing affection where it was not welcome. Beyond the estate walls, the storm brewed. Mrs. Agatha Remington hosted a tea that week, an annual affair known for its exclusivity and grandeur. Every notable family in Newport attended. Anna, though now a Sinclair, received no invitation. When the event concluded, the newspapers praised Agatha's silk imported from Lyon, her lemon tarts, and the performance by a visiting soprano. But the true entertainment had taken place beneath the parasols. "She's trying to hide behind muslin and humility," Agatha said, her voice dripping honeyed contempt. "But you cannot polish plainness. And poor Henry, well, men in grief often make sympathetic mistakes." The laughter that followed was soft and cruel. Ladies clutched their fans, eyes sparkled with mock pity, and in parlours all across Newport, Anna's name was passed like a game, each whisper sharpening it into something jagged. Anna heard the rumours. The servants, try as they might, could not shield her from every word. She was only ever a governess, you know. I heard she seduced him in the garden. They say she prays in Latin and writes secret letters to herself. She walked through it all without flinching. One afternoon, while reviewing household accounts, Anna noticed a discrepancy in the linen budget. She brought it to Mrs. Cresswell's attention quietly, suggesting a more efficient supplier. The older woman looked at her surprised. "You understand ledgers, madam? I was managing expenses for a household of 7 by the time I was 19, Anna said simply. Necessity teaches many things. Mrs. Cresswell nodded. From that day forward, her glances held a hint of approval. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the household began to shift. A footman began opening the door for her with more confidence. A kitchen maid asked her opinion on a new pudding recipe. James sat on her lap during reading hour, and one morning Lillian entered the breakfast room, stood by the window, and asked in a quiet voice if Anna knew how to braid hair the way her mother used to. Anna said yes. She did not speak of the moment to anyone, but that evening, as she wrote in her journal by candlelight, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Henry remained a mystery. He left early and returned late. His study door was often closed. At dinner, he spoke of investments, steel contracts, and rail expansions, never once glancing at her across the table for longer than a breath. Yet he always stood when she entered the room. He never raised his voice, and once, when her hand brushed his as she passed him the wine, he froze for just a second and looked at her as if she had struck him. That night, she could not sleep. The sea roared outside, winds brushing against the glass panes of her window like whispers from a world she no longer belonged to. She stood, barefoot, and crossed to the mirror once more. This time, the woman who looked back at her was not a shadow. She was a presence. She was Mrs. Henry Sinclair, unwanted by society, unwelcomed by the elite. But slowly, silently, claiming her place, not by force, not by beauty, but by something deeper, by quiet strength, by the unwavering dignity of one who had nothing and feared no one. The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, the Remington seal pressed in gold wax and flanked by delicate embossed vines. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Henry Sinclair, as though the sender were unaware or chose to ignore the weight such words now carried in Newport's social sphere. The Remington Masquerade Ball was not merely a social event, it was a spectacle. A coronation of vanity and power, where fortunes were flaunted in silk and rivalry danced beneath crystal chandeliers. Agatha Remington, with her iron spine and velvet gloves, hosted it every summer at her sprawling estate along Ochre Point. Attendance was not optional. It was a declaration of one's place in the unspoken hierarchy of the Gilded Age. And now Anna was expected to walk into that den of powdered smiles and sharpened fans, bearing a name no one believed she deserved. Henry handed her the invitation over breakfast, his expression unreadable. "You should come," he said, as though suggesting she take a walk through the garden. Anna looked at the card, then at her husband. "Do you truly think that wise?" "They've already decided who you are," he replied, setting down his cup. "Let them see what they've failed to understand." His tone was firm, but there was no trace of warmth, only resolve. Like a general sending a soldier into battle, he would not fight himself. Anna folded the invitation neatly and placed it beside her plate. "Very well," she said, her voice even. The days that followed moved slowly, weighted by expectation. Word spread quickly that the Sinclairs would attend. Maids whispered behind closed doors, dressmakers gossiped openly, and in drawing rooms filled with rose-scented air, fans fluttered with anticipation of the spectacle to come. Anna, knowing she would not be welcome at any of Newport's exclusive dressmakers, called instead for Mary Alden, a seamstress who had once altered her governess gowns and now worked in the quiet corner of a millinery shop. Mary arrived with careful humility, her tape measure in hand, her eyes wide with wonder. "You'll be the loveliest woman there, Mrs. Sinclair," she said, almost in a whisper. Anna smiled gently. "Let's not aim for lovely, Mary. Let's aim for dignity." They worked together in the evenings, candlelight glinting off pins and needles. The gown, fashioned from pale silver silk with hints of lavender, was modest in design. A fitted bodice, with soft draping at the shoulders and a high waistline that fell in graceful folds to the floor. The neckline was cut just enough to frame the collarbone, and the sleeves fluttered slightly, like whispers against the skin. A simple mask, embroidered with tiny pearls, would cover her eyes and part of her cheeks. No diamonds, no fanfare, only elegance. On the evening of the ball, Anna stood before the full-length mirror in her chamber. Her hair was arranged in a low, classical twist, pinned with a single comb of mother-of-pearl. Her gloves were ivory, her expression calm. When she descended the staircase, Henry was already waiting in the vestibule, dressed in a black tailcoat and white cravat. He turned at the sound of her steps, and for the briefest moment, something in his gaze faltered. She saw it. The flicker of surprise, the unguarded silence. "You look," he began, but the sentence never found its end. She offered her gloved hand. "Shall we?" They arrived at the Remington estate shortly after 9. The mansion shimmered with hundreds of lanterns, casting golden light upon marble columns and stained glass windows. Music spilled from the ballroom, violins and cellos entwined in a waltz that seemed to pull the world into rhythm. Inside, the crowd parted as the Sinclairs entered, not with reverence but curiosity. Masks turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne flutes trembled slightly on silver trays. Anna moved with grace, her arm lightly resting in Henry's, her chin high. She could feel the stares, the judgments behind every bejeweled mask. Her husband offered no reassurance, no whispered encouragement. He was present, but distant, a statue carved from ambition and mourning. Agatha Remington appeared with theatrical timing, dressed in crimson velvet, her mask adorned with black feathers that arched like a crown. Her smile was a blade. "My dear Mrs. Sinclair," she purred, lifting her glass. "How refreshing to see you among us." Such courage. Anna inclined her head. "Good evening, Mrs. Remington. Thank you for the invitation." "Oh, it was not mine alone," Agatha replied, her eyes glittering. "The whole of Newport insisted. We're simply dying to meet the woman who captured the heart of our city's most eligible widower." Henry's hand did not tighten on Anna's. He said nothing. Agatha's smile widened. "You know," she said sweetly, "there's a portrait of Eleanor in the North Gallery. Perhaps you've seen it?" Anna's breath caught, only slightly, but Agatha noticed, like a hawk. "We're displaying it tonight in her honor. It was painted the year before her passing, a vision in sapphire silk." She turned to the crowd. "Shall we take a walk?" The corridor leading to the gallery was lined with mirrors and gilt-framed landscapes. Guests followed like moths to a flame, eager for spectacle. Anna walked at Henry's side, but the space between them felt infinite. When they entered the gallery, gasps followed. There, beneath a golden arch, hung the portrait. Eleanor Sinclair, the late wife. She was exquisite. High cheekbones, cascading auburn curls, lips slightly parted in a soft smile. She wore a gown of deep sapphire, shimmering beneath painted candlelight. Around her neck a diamond choker, in her eyes, pride. And beside her, in pale silver silk and a mask of pearls, stood Anna. The contrast was stark. Agatha turned to the onlookers with mock solemnity. Such different women, yet bound by the same man. How time changes taste. Laughter rippled through the crowd, delicate and poisonous. Anna stood motionless. Her heart beat painfully in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. She met Eleanor's gaze in the painting. She felt the weight of expectation, of comparison, of deliberate humiliation. and she refused to lower her eyes. "I see now," Anna said softly, her voice clear as glass, "that grief leaves many shadows. Some of them even wear velvet." The room fell silent. Agatha's smile faltered. Henry looked at Anna then, truly looked, but said nothing. She turned on her heel and walked away, her gown rustling softly against the polished floor, each step measured, every breath drawn with dignity. That night, as the carriage returned them to the Sinclair estate, Anna said nothing. Henry did not speak either. When they reached the front door, she descended without waiting for his hand. Inside, she climbed the staircase alone, the house still and echoing with silence. In her chamber, she removed the mask, then the gown, folding it carefully. She did not cry. She sat at her writing desk, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. She had entered the battlefield they called society and emerged not victorious but unbroken. Yet as the candle flickered beside her and the waves crashed faintly beyond the window, Anna felt a sorrow deeper than shame, because the man who could have silenced the cruelty, who could have reached for her, spoken her name, defended her dignity, had remained a statue. And statues do not bleed, nor do they love. That night, for the first time since her wedding, Anna wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The morning after the Remington masquerade dawned heavy and grey, as though the sky itself had chosen to draw a veil over Newport's glittering world. Sea mist rolled across the cliffs and clung to the iron gates of the Sinclair estate, softening its severe grandeur. Inside, the household moved with subdued urgency. Servants whispered in corners, their glances darting toward the main staircase, aware that something unspoken had happened at the ball, but unwilling to name it aloud. Anna awoke early, her body still stiff from the long night and the weight of her composure. She had not wept, yet her eyes felt raw, her temples pulsing with a quiet ache. She dressed simply in a pale blue day gown with a high collar and narrow sleeves, fastening her cameo brooch as though it were armor. When she descended to the breakfast room, Henry was already there, standing by the window with a cup of black coffee, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He turned when she entered. For a moment, neither spoke. The room smelled faintly of salt and roses from a vase left on the sideboard, their petals drooping slightly, as if even the flowers sensed the tension. Henry's posture was rigid, yet something in his face had changed. The lines of control around his mouth were softer, his eyes more unguarded. "I should have stopped her," he said finally, his voice low but steady. Anna paused by the doorway. "It wasn't your fault, Mr. Sinclair." His jaw tightened. "It was my responsibility." He set the cup down with deliberate care. "They should not have compared you to Eleanor. It was cruel. And He broke off, his hand brushing the windowsill as if searching for balance. "I should have spoken. I should have defended you." Anna's hands remained folded at her waist. "Silence is also an answer," she said quietly, but without bitterness. He looked at her then, truly looked, as though the woman standing before him had shifted shape overnight. For a heartbeat, the distance between them seemed fragile, like a thread ready to break or bind. But before either could say more, the door opened and a maid hurried in, her face pale. "Miss Lillian is unwell," she said. "Fever since dawn." Anna's composure faltered only slightly. She moved toward the door at once. "Call for the doctor," she instructed, already climbing the stairs. Lillian's room was a pale sanctuary of lace and white-painted wood, the curtains drawn to keep out the harsh morning light. The little girl lay curled beneath the coverlet, her cheeks flushed, her golden hair damp with perspiration. She stirred fitfully, whispering words too faint to catch. The nurse hovered nearby, wringing her hands, but it was Anna who went directly to the bedside. She knelt and pressed a cool palm to Lillian's forehead. The heat startled her. It burned through her glove. "Fetch water," she ordered softly. "Clean cloths." The hours that followed blurred into a vigil. The doctor came and went, prescribing powders and muttering about summer fevers, but it was Anna who remained. She bathed Lillian's brow with cool compresses, coaxed her to drink spoonfuls of water, and sang softly under her breath, an old hymn from her childhood, its notes steady and low. Her gloves were soon abandoned, her sleeves rolled back as she worked with quiet precision, unafraid of exhaustion. Henry stood at the doorway once, watching. He did not enter. He saw the curve of Anna's back as she leaned over the child, the way her hair had come loose from its pins, a few strands clinging to her damp temples. She looked nothing like the women at the Remington ball. She looked like someone he could not categorize, someone outside the world of masks and alliances. Night fell, then another morning. Anna did not leave Lillian's side. She slept in a chair by the bed, her head resting lightly against her arm, waking at every movement. She soothed nightmares with a touch, calmed restlessness with a whisper. Her patience was unyielding, her presence steady as a lighthouse in a storm. It was during one of those fevered hours, when the room smelled of lavender water and candle wax, that Lillian stirred and reached out with a trembling hand. Her eyes opened, green and glazed, and fixed on Anna's face. "Mama," she murmured. The word was a fragile thing, slipping between the girl's dry lips like a prayer. Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. She felt the small fingers clutch her own, fever-hot and desperate. She squeezed back gently, tears rising but unshed. "I'm here," she whispered. Henry, standing unseen in the hall, heard the word. It struck him with unexpected force, as if some hidden door inside him had opened. He stepped back before Anna could notice him and returned to his study, closing the door softly behind him. He poured a glass of brandy he did not drink, staring at the dark liquid as though it might answer a question. When Lillian's fever finally broke 2 days later, the doctor called it a simple summer illness. Anna did not correct him. She only helped the child sit up, fed her a spoonful of broth, and brushed damp hair from her forehead. Lillian looked at her with shy gratitude, a new softness in her gaze. She did not speak the word again, but she did not pull her hand away when Anna tucked the blankets around her. That evening, after ensuring both children were asleep, Anna descended to the library to find a book to read. She had not expected to find Henry there, seated by the fire with no papers in his hands, his posture unusually relaxed. The room smelled of leather-bound volumes and faint smoke. A single lamp cast a warm glow across his face. He rose as she entered. "How is she?" "Better," Anna said. "The fever has passed." He nodded, but did not resume his seat. "You've done more for her than anyone," he said quietly. "More than I—" "You're her father," Anna interrupted softly. "She needs you." He looked at her, something flickering in his eyes, a blend of shame and wonder. "I am not the man you think I am, Mrs. Sinclair," he said at last. "Then tell me who you are," she replied, her voice steady. He hesitated, then moved closer to the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. Eleanor was beautiful. Everyone adored her. They still do. But she was never what people imagined. Our marriage was built on appearance, not warmth. We dined together like strangers. We raised our children in separate rooms. She filled the house with music, but not once did she sing for them. His voice cracked, only slightly. "I thought I wanted a wife like that. I thought it was enough. It wasn't." Anna stood still, her heart beating faster. She had never heard him speak so openly, his mask of control slipping like a curtain drawn aside. In the glow of the firelight, he looked less like a magnate and more like a man, tired, haunted, uncertain. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you've done what I could not," he said simply. "You've reached them. You've reached her." Anna lowered her gaze. "I didn't try to reach her. I only stayed." "Sometimes," he said, "that's all it takes." A silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. The crackle of the fire filled the space where words had been. Henry took a step closer, not enough to breach propriety, but enough that Anna could feel the heat of his presence. He did not touch her. He only looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a governess, not as a convenience, but as something he did not yet understand. "You're tired," he said at last. "Go rest." Anna inclined her head, her composure intact. "Good night, Mr. Sinclair." But as she turned to leave, she felt his gaze on her back like a hand not yet raised. In that unspoken moment, something shifted, not in words, not in gestures, but in the quiet realization that the walls between them were no longer seamless. They had cracks now, hairline fractures through which light might enter. Upstairs in her chamber, Anna sat at her writing desk and opened her journal. She did not write about the fever or the child's whispered word. Instead, she wrote a single line: "Even stone can be softened by water, given time." Then she closed the book and extinguished the lamp, the sound of the sea rising beyond the window like a heartbeat, steady and patient, against the cliffs. The days following Lillian's recovery passed with the heavy stillness that often follows a storm. The Sinclair household resumed its rhythms, but something unspoken pulsed beneath the surface. The children grew more affectionate, more present. James began slipping notes beneath Anna's door, clumsy sketches of birds and steam trains. Lillian, though still quiet, now greeted her with soft smiles, her hand sometimes lingering in Anna's when they walked through the gardens. Henry too had changed, but not in ways easily defined. He spoke more often now, joined the children for supper, and occasionally sat with Anna in the drawing room, his eyes distant, his voice low. He never spoke of Eleanor again, nor did he mention what Lillian had whispered in her fever, but something in his gaze, when it lingered too long on Anna's face, hinted at thoughts he had not yet named aloud. It was on a warm afternoon in late July, when the sky was pearl grey and the sea lay flat like polished silver, that the past arrived at the Sinclair estate in a carriage trimmed in navy and gold. The sound of hooves echoed in the courtyard, and from the parlour window Anna saw the figure descend, a woman dressed in sapphire silk, her hat adorned with peacock feathers, her gloves immaculate. Margaret Wells. Even before the butler announced her, Anna knew. There was a presence to Margaret that entered a room before she did, like perfume, like expectation. Her beauty was undeniable, fair skin with a blush of rose, full lips that curved like secrets, eyes the colour of a storm about to break. She moved as though the floor itself were made to receive her. Henry met her in the vestibule. Anna remained at the top of the stairs, unseen but listening. "Margaret," he said, not coldly, but without warmth. "I hadn't expected you." "I know," she replied, her voice like velvet. "That's why I came." She lifted her veil and smiled. When Anna was finally introduced, it was in the drawing room. Henry stood between them, his expression careful. Margaret extended a gloved hand, her eyes sweeping over Anna in a single unkind glance that left nothing untouched. "So, you're the new Mrs. Sinclair," she said, her smile polite but edged. "Forgive me, I had imagined someone taller." Anna accepted the handshake without flinching. "And I had imagined someone older." The air between them shimmered. Margaret laughed, touching Henry's arm with familiarity. "Charming." "You didn't say she was charming, Henry." She doesn't need me to speak for her," he replied. Margaret stayed 3 days. She claimed it was a brief stop before continuing north to visit cousins in Bar Harbor, but her trunks suggested otherwise. She dined at the Sinclair table with ease, praised the wine, and commented on Anna's housekeeping with compliments so veiled they felt like silk-wrapped blades. "The nursery looks so quaint now," she mused during a walk through the garden. "When Eleanor was alive, it had such elegance. But I suppose simplicity suits your tastes, doesn't it, Anna?" Anna met her gaze steadily. "The children are happy. That's all that matters." Margaret's smile deepened. "Yes, children are so forgiving. They don't yet see the difference between love and obligation." Henry said little during these moments. He watched, listened, occasionally changed the subject. But Anna noticed how he responded to Margaret's laughter, how his eyes softened with familiarity. They had shared something once, a season, perhaps longer. It was not forgotten. One evening after dinner, Anna found herself alone in the small conservatory, trimming a dying orchid. The room smelled of earth and citrus blossoms. Outside, the ocean murmured low and steady. She did not hear Margaret enter. "You're brave," the woman said, her voice floating across the space like smoke. "Taking on this house, this family. Henry." Anna straightened but did not turn. "I didn't take anything. I was asked." Margaret circled her slowly, like a dancer tracing a silent rhythm. "Did he tell you about us?" "No," Anna replied. "He didn't need to." Margaret smiled, pleased. "We were close, very close. After Eleanor passed, everyone expected we'd marry. Henry and I understood each other. We came from the same world, same tastes, same expectations." She stepped closer. "That must be difficult for you, walking into a life already built for someone else." Anna finally turned. Her voice was calm. "The walls may be the same, but the air is different." Margaret tilted her head. "Is it? Or are you just a placeholder until Henry remembers who he used to be?" The words landed like a slap, delicate but deep. Anna looked away. "Why are you really here?" Margaret didn't answer. She touched a jasmine bloom, inhaled, and smiled. "I wanted to see it for myself. The woman who replaced Eleanor. And me." The next morning, Margaret departed. She embraced Henry at the carriage, whispering something Anna could not hear. He didn't respond. He stood back, hands behind his back, watching the carriage until it vanished into the fog. Anna remained on the terrace. She had not slept. Her thoughts ran in circles, echoes of Margaret's words, of Henry's silence, of a portrait that still hung in the upstairs hall. She could not unsee the truth. She had been chosen for convenience. She had given kindness, patience, effort. But love, true, spoken love, remained absent. That night, Henry found her in the library, staring at the unlit fireplace. "I apologize," he said. "For what?" "For not asking her to stay away." Anna turned slowly. "Why didn't you?" He hesitated. "Because part of me wanted to see her again, to know if I had chosen wrongly." The honesty stung more than any cruelty. "And have you?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice rough. "No." But the word lingered in the space between them, weightless. It lacked anchor. It did not carry warmth, only truth. Anna nodded once, then left the room without another word. In her chamber, she removed her brooch and set it on the vanity, her fingers trembling. She had walked into this marriage with eyes open, knowing it was not built on romance, but she had not expected the ground beneath her feet to shift with every whisper of the past. That night, as the wind howled against the windows, Anna sat at her writing desk and penned no entry. Some nights were too silent even for words. A pale rain fell over Newport like a whispered confession, tapping gently against the tall windows of the Sinclair estate. The sky wore the same grey as morning silk, and the scent of wet roses drifted through the corridors like a memory that refused to fade. Inside the house, the atmosphere was hushed, introspective, as if the walls themselves were listening. Anna moved through the morning with quiet purpose. She oversaw the preparation of the children's midday lessons, reviewed household accounts, and spent an hour in the nursery with James, who had recently become fascinated with ships and insisted she read him the same passage from Treasure Island 3 times. Her voice remained steady, but her heart was not. Since Margaret Wells's visit, something within Anna had begun to shift. She did not blame Henry for his past, nor for the unspoken distance that still lingered between them like an invisible veil, but the ache of uncertainty, of never knowing where she truly stood in the life she now inhabited, pressed more heavily on her with each passing day. It was in the late afternoon, when the children were occupied and the house unusually quiet, that she wandered into the east corridor and found herself outside Henry's study. The door stood half open. A draught stirred the heavy curtains, and the air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and aged leather. She had not been inside the study since arriving as mistress. Henry spent his evenings there, sometimes long into the night. She respected the boundary, as she did all things he left undefined. But today something called her inward. She stepped inside softly. The room was shadowed, lit only by the grey light filtering through the rain-specked windows. Books lined the walls in tall mahogany shelves. The large desk, immaculate and orderly, stood like an altar of work and solitude. She moved toward it slowly, her fingers grazing the edge of the polished surface. A silver inkwell, a brass letter opener, a stack of documents tied in burgundy ribbon. Then her hand brushed the edge of the drawer on the right. It was slightly ajar. She hesitated. It was not her place. And yet, something whispered, almost breathed from within. She slid the drawer open. Inside, beneath a stack of old ledgers and a forgotten penknife, lay a bundle of letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. The paper was ivory, the handwriting delicate, slanted, and unmistakably feminine. Her breath caught. She sat slowly, her fingers trembling as she untied the ribbon. The letters were dated over several years. All were signed with the same name. Yours always, Lucien. The words on the page unfolded like a confession never meant to be read. I watched you across the ballroom tonight and wondered how much longer we can live behind this glass. I am your wife's friend, your partner in business, and yet, in my dreams, I am simply yours. Another letter. Eleanor grows cold, Henry. You see it, you feel it. We both live in shadows now. But in you I feel light. I feel breath. Anna's hand shook. She read on, each line carving into her like a quiet blade. There had been an affair. Eleanor, the adored, the untouchable, had fallen in love with another man. And not just any man, but a business partner, a friend. The implications were staggering, and Henry had known. At the bottom of the drawer lay one final letter. This one was not from Lucien. It was from Henry, never sent, never sealed. I will protect the children. That is all that matters now. Your memory, your beauty. Let them say what they will. I will not speak of your betrayal. I will not drag our children's name through the filth of gossip. I will carry your secrets, Eleanor, but I will never love again. Anna sat frozen, not in outrage, but in sorrow. How much silence had this man endured? How many nights had he slept beside a stranger, wearing the mask of the devoted husband, while his heart ached with betrayal? She did not cry. She gathered the letters carefully and replaced them exactly as she had found them, tying the ribbon as gently as one would bind a wound. Then she closed the drawer. That evening the rain continued, soft and endless. Anna found Henry in the conservatory, standing by the windows with a glass of brandy in his hand. He did not turn when she entered. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. I read them, she said softly. He flinched but did not speak. I didn't mean to, she continued. The drawer was open. I thought it was something else. But once I saw... I know, he said, cutting her off gently. I left them there. Anna's breath caught. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw no anger, no accusation, only resignation. I thought I had buried it, he said. The scandal, the shame. I made certain Lucien disappeared from the company. I erased everything for the children, for Eleanor's name, for my own survival. You carried it alone, Anna whispered. He nodded. Because I could not bear the weight of another soul's pity. I don't pity you, she said. Their eyes met. Henry stepped forward slowly, setting his glass on the table. The lamplight glowed behind him, softening the hard lines of his face. He looked not like a magnate, not like a man forged in steel and duty, but like a soul stripped bare. I chose you, Anna, he said, his voice trembling, because I thought you would not ask for my heart, because I thought I no longer had one to give. Anna's eyes burned. I didn't ask for anything, she said. I know, he replied, and still, you gave everything. She did not move. He stepped closer, stopping just inches from her. You stayed when others would have fled. You saw me when I tried to disappear. You brought warmth into a house I thought would remain cold forever. He reached up, gently brushing a damp strand of hair from her temple. "I thought silence was safety," he said, "but it's become my prison." Anna swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper, then let it end. His hand lingered on her cheek, trembling slightly. And then, slowly, reverently, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, it was not a kiss of triumph, it was a kiss of awakening, of breath returned to lungs long starved, of light cracking through the stone walls of the past. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to be what you deserve," he whispered. Anna's hands rose slowly to his chest, feeling the beat of a heart long hidden. "Just be honest," she murmured. "That's more than enough." The rain outside softened into mist. Inside, the silence between them changed. It was no longer distance, it was promise. The sun rose blood-orange over the cliffs of Newport, streaking the sea with fire long before the flames touched earth. The Sinclair estate stood still in the early light, its white walls gilded by dawn, its windows like silent eyes. But peace, that fragile illusion, would not survive the morning. It began with a scream. A maid, breathless and barefoot, ran into the main hall, shouting of smoke and heat. The stables were ablaze. By the time Anna reached the courtyard, her skirts trailing ash and dew, the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and scorched hay. Sparks crackled upward into the morning sky, and the terrified whinnying of horses tore through the air like grief given voice. Servants rushed with buckets, their faces ghostly in the shifting light. James stood on the veranda, pale with shock, while Lillian clung to his hand, her eyes wide and wet. Henry arrived moments later, his coat unbuttoned, his face carved in stone. "Get them back inside," he ordered, his voice sharp. Anna pulled the children close. She felt the heat against her skin, the trembling of Lillian's shoulders, and the rising weight of dread in her chest. It took over an hour to bring the fire under control. One of the horses, a young mare meant for James, had been lost. The others, spooked and bloodied, were led to the far paddock. Smoke coiled into the trees, and the blackened ruins of the stable stood like bones beneath a funeral sky. By mid-morning the whispers began. It was no accident. There were no lanterns left burning, no carelessness to blame. The fire had been set with intent, and someone had opened the stall doors, some to free the horses, some to lure them to panic. Suspicion spread quickly through the servants' quarters. But it settled like a vulture on one man, Caleb Foster, the stableman, quiet, loyal. He had been with the Sinclairs since before Anna's arrival. He had trained James to ride, polished the carriage wheels to gleaming perfection, and once mended Anna's boot when the sole had come loose after a storm. But now the housekeeper said he had been seen in the paddock after dark. A kitchen maid swore he had argued with one of the footmen. Someone else recalled him saying bitterly that change had come to the house too quickly. By noon, Henry summoned him. Anna entered the study uninvited, her heart thudding with disbelief. Caleb stood tall, his cap in hand, his face pale but resolute. "I didn't do it, sir," he said, voice hoarse. "I'd die before I harmed one of them animals. Or this house." Henry said nothing. His fingers were steepled beneath his chin, his gaze unreadable. Anna stepped forward. "He's telling the truth." Henry's eyes flicked to hers. "You can't know that." "I do," she said, "because I know his heart. He's never looked at this place with envy, only pride. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's with care. If you dismiss him based on gossip, you'll be doing exactly what they did to me." Henry stood slowly. The fire was deliberate. Someone must be held accountable. "Not an innocent man," she said. "I have the estate to protect, Anna, the staff, the children. This isn't about pride." "No," she interrupted, her voice rising. "It's about fear. You're afraid of being judged, of the papers, of society. So you'll sacrifice a man who has done nothing because it's easier than facing their questions." His jaw clenched. "Do not speak to me of fear. You don't know what I carry." "Then tell me," she cried. Tell me why you'd betray the only man here who has never once lied to you." The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Caleb lowered his head. "I'll go," he said quietly. "I won't cause more trouble." Anna turned to him, her eyes burning. "You don't have to." "Yes, ma'am, I do. Some houses, they stop wanting you." With that, he placed his cap on his head, bowed once to Henry, and left. The front door closed like a judgment. Anna remained where she stood, her breath sharp, her hands trembling. Henry didn't look at her. "You fired him to protect the estate," she said, her voice breaking. "But who protects what's left of your soul?" He turned away. "You don't understand the consequences of hesitation." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No, Henry. What I don't understand is how a man who can hold the world in his hand still chooses silence over truth, still chooses fear over faith." He said nothing. Anna stepped back, her heart twisting. "I'll stay through the end of the season," she said, her voice low. "For the children. But after that, I'm leaving." He turned sharply. "Anna! I cannot live in a house where love is rationed, where trust is conditional, where I am expected to give everything and accept half in return." His face crumpled, just slightly, but not enough. She left the room without another word. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Rain had returned, soft and persistent, and the halls echoed with the ghost of what could have been. In her chamber, Anna packed nothing. She simply sat at her desk, staring at the empty page before her. She had no words left to give. In the darkness, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, and the sea kept its rhythm. Eternal, indifferent. The fire in the stables had gone out, but another had begun to smoulder in her chest, and this one no water could touch. The first leaves of late summer trembled in the sea wind, clinging to the elms along Bellevue Avenue, as if reluctant to surrender their hold. Newport season was at its fevered height. Dinners, teas, races, whispered intrigues behind lace fans. Yet in the drawing rooms where society's judgment was brewed, another game was being played, its aim more ruthless than any spectacle of fortune. Anna Hayes Sinclair had become the subject of a campaign. It began with small murmurs, floated from one salon to another like a perfumed note. She came to him already compromised. Someone whispered at the milliner's. "Did you know she was with child before the wedding?" hissed another at a terrace luncheon. The rumor sprouted like ivy, entwining truth with invention, its origin carefully hidden, but its reach inevitable. At the center of it all stood Agatha Remington, queen of Newport's social kingdom, and beside her Margaret Wells, her goddaughter, whose smile had sharpened into a blade. They had tried humiliation at the masquerade. They had tried doubt with whispered insinuations. But now they reached for scandal, the one weapon powerful enough to destroy Anna's fragile standing in a world that had never wanted her. Anna heard the whispers through servants, through stifled remarks at the grocer, through the way a stranger's eyes lingered too long on her belly when she walked in the gardens. At first she ignored them, but soon she understood the scale of the attack. This was not petty gossip. It was a noose. In the Sinclair estate, she moved with calm dignity, but inside she felt the tremor of the trap closing. She had done nothing to deserve this, yet once again society sought to define her with lies. Only this time it was not a question of invisibility, but of survival. Henry seemed troubled but distant. He had heard the rumors too. His silence was not indifference. She could see it in the way his hands tightened on his glass at supper, in the restless pacing of his study at night. But he said nothing, and in that nothing, the old ache returned to her heart. Would he defend her? Or would he allow her to stand alone, as he had before? The charity banquet was announced at the end of August. It would be held at the Remington estate, in the great hall draped in crimson banners. Every notable family would attend. The newspapers had already begun speculating on who would appear, whose jewels would sparkle brightest under the gaslight. But beneath the glitter, Agatha's plan coiled like a serpent. Henry received the formal invitation with its flourish of gold lettering. Beneath the polite words was a private note written in Agatha's hand. "It would be best for appearances if you came without your wife." He placed the note on his desk and stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. Anna did not ask. She prepared the children's lessons, visited the gardens, and maintained her calm. But when she passed Henry in the hall, she caught a flicker in his eyes, conflict as if he were weighing something far heavier than dinner seating. That night he stayed in his study long after the lamps were out. She sat alone in her chamber, brushing her hair before the mirror, the candlelight catching on the cameo at her throat. She told herself she would not hope. The evening of the banquet arrived with a sky the colour of molten pewter. Lanterns glowed in the windows of the Remington estate, throwing long pools of gold across the gravel drive. Inside, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Silk gowns in jewel tones swept the marble floors, masks glittered with beads, and champagne flowed in a river of polite laughter. But the undercurrent was not celebration, it was expectation. Where was the scandalous Mrs. Sinclair? Agatha stood near the dais, a vision in black satin, her fan opening and closing with the measured grace of a predator's tail. Margaret hovered nearby in a gown of emerald silk, her eyes scanning the entrance. "He will come alone," she murmured. "He has no choice." The butler's voice rang out, "Mr. and Mrs. Henry Sinclair." A ripple passed through the crowd, like the hush before a storm. Heads turned, fans stilled. Henry Sinclair walked into the hall with Anna on his arm. She wore no ostentatious gown. Her dress was of deep, dove-grey silk, simple and exquisitely cut, with a modest neckline that framed her collarbone like an unspoken vow. Her gloves were white, her hair arranged in a low knot, pinned with mother-of-pearl. No diamonds, no feathers, only dignity, but she moved with such grace, her chin high, her eyes calm, that the simplicity became its own defiance. Whispers rose like a wind through dry grass. Henry guided her to the center of the room and did not release her arm. He could feel the tension in her hand, but she did not falter. Together they crossed the hall to the dais where Agatha waited, her smile carved in ice. "How unexpected," Agatha said, her voice honeyed. "We had not anticipated your wife would accompany you tonight." Henry's eyes met hers. "Then you anticipated wrongly." The room fell silent. Agatha's fan snapped shut. Margaret's smile faltered. Somewhere in the back, a glass slipped from a servant's tray and shattered against the floor. Henry stepped forward, still holding Anna's hand. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried through the hall with the weight of a hammer striking iron. "I have heard the rumors," he said. "We all have, and I will answer them once here and never again." He drew a breath, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "This woman, Anna Hayes Sinclair, entered my home with no fortune, no pedigree, no shield but her own dignity. She cared for my children when others used them to curry favor. She endured your cruelty and your gossip with grace. She has given this house warmth it had never known." A murmur rippled, but no one spoke. Henry's gaze fixed on Agatha. "You sought to humiliate her. You spread lies to break her. But the truth is this. She is the finest woman Newport has ever overlooked." He turned slightly, his hand tightening around Anna's. "And she is my wife, by choice, by respect, by admiration. And though it may wound your sensibilities, by love." The word hung in the air like a bell tolling at dawn. Anna felt it vibrate through her chest. Love, spoken not in a whisper, not behind closed doors, but in a hall full of enemies. She looked at Henry, and for the first time there was no mask between them. Only a man who had chosen to stand beside her. Margaret's face paled, her composure cracking. She turned sharply and moved toward the doors, her skirts sweeping behind her like the retreat of a vanquished army. Agatha's lips tightened, but her power was slipping. Even the women nearest her began to shift uncomfortably, their fans fluttering not in agreement, but in uncertainty. Henry guided Anna to a seat at the head table. Conversation resumed slowly, but the tone had changed. People glanced at Anna with new eyes, not warm, not yet, but no longer dismissive. The gossip that had once threatened to drown her now lay broken at her feet. Through it all, Anna remained composed. She did not smile broadly. She did not gloat. She simply sat, her gloved hands resting lightly on the tablecloth, her back straight, her eyes shining with a quiet light. Inside, however, her heart was a storm, relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something that felt like the first true breath after a long submersion. When the banquet ended, Henry escorted her out under the glow of the lanterns. The night air was cool, tasting faintly of salt and rain. Carriages lined the drive, their lamps flickering like watchful eyes. In the privacy of their carriage, Anna turned to him. "Why?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression open. "Because it was time." She searched his face. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." They rode in silence, but it was a different silence now, warmer, charged, like the space between two notes of a song not yet finished. As the carriage wheels rolled over the cobblestones, Anna looked out at the dark sea beyond the cliffs. For the first time since she had entered this world, she did not feel like an intruder. She felt like a woman who had stood in the center of the storm and found her ground. And though she said nothing, she knew this night would be remembered, not as the night she was broken, but as the night she ceased to be invisible. The last golden days of summer faded gently over Newport, like a curtain drawn on a season that had changed everything. The salt air turned crisp, the scent of wisteria gave way to drying leaves, and the endless murmur of the Atlantic deepened, no longer playful, but contemplative, like a memory one carried with quiet reverence. The Sinclair estate stood unchanged in its grandeur, but within its walls, something had undeniably shifted. Anna moved through the halls with the same grace, her gestures still calm and measured, her voice still soft. But now, when she entered a room, people rose, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Servants no longer averted their eyes. They greeted her with warmth, with respect that had been earned, not imposed. Her name was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was spoken at teas and charity gatherings with curiosity, sometimes even admiration. Mrs. Anna Hayes Sinclair, the woman who had weathered Newport's cruelties with a lifted chin and a steady heart. The woman who had become not just a wife, but a symbol of something rarer than nobility, dignity without vanity, love without artifice. In the nursery, laughter echoed daily. James, bright-eyed and endlessly inquisitive, had taken to drawing trains in every spare moment, presenting each sketch to Anna with the solemnity of an offering. Lillian had grown quieter in recent weeks, more thoughtful, but the distance in her eyes had vanished. One morning, as Anna was braiding Lillian's hair beside the window, the little girl looked up and asked shyly, "Will you come to the recital?" Anna smiled. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." Lillian hesitated, then reached up and wrapped her arms around Anna's waist. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. Later that day, as Anna passed the open parlor door, she heard Lillian refer to her in conversation with the music tutor. "My mother says I play too quickly," she said without hesitation. The word, mother, fell into Anna's heart like sunlight after a long storm. She paused by the wall, unseen, and let her hand rest over her chest, where something deep and fragile stirred. That evening, as dusk brushed the windows in lavender and ash, Henry entered the drawing room, while Anna was seated with a needlework hoop in her lap. The fire crackled softly. Her hair, now streaked with hints of sun, was pulled back loosely, and she looked up at him not with surprise, but with something far more intimate, recognition. "I'd like to show you something," he said. She set her embroidery down and followed him, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. They passed through the garden, now overgrown with the last bloom of summer, and continued along a path she had never taken. The earth smelled of salt and pine. The wind lifted strands of her hair as they climbed a gentle rise toward the cliffs. At the edge, beyond a field of golden grass, stood a small clearing. The land fell away into a sheer drop over the ocean, waves crashing far below in a ceaseless rhythm. The horizon stretched wide and solemn, painted in hues of copper and rose. Anna turned to Henry, her cheeks flushed by the wind. "It's beautiful." He looked at her, his eyes quiet. "This land belonged to my father. He meant to build a summer house here, but never did. I've let it sit untouched for years." She waited, sensing the weight behind his words. "I've decided to build a library," he continued, "and a school for children from the harbour districts, those who can't pay for tutors or find their way into salons." Anna's eyes widened. "Henry," he reached into his coat and unfolded a small parchment, a sketch of a building with arched windows and wide steps. "It will be named after you," he said simply. "The Anna Hayes Sinclair Institute." Emotions swelled in her throat before she could contain it. This isn't necessary," she murmured. "I know," he said. "That's why it's real." He stepped closer, the wind tugging at his coat, the sun low behind him. "You've given this house a heart. You've given my children peace. And you've given me—" He paused, then took her hand, bringing it to his lips with quiet reverence. "You've given me the courage to begin again." She looked up at him, her breath catching, and saw not the powerful magnate, not the widower bound in grief, but the man beneath it all, the man who had once chosen silence, and now chose her. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. "You deserve far more," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my life giving it to you." Their fingers intertwined, not with urgency, but with certainty. They stood there for a long while, the sea roaring below them, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon like a blessing. When they returned to the estate, arm in arm, the lamps in the windows glowed with the soft welcome of home. The doors opened without announcement. The staff greeted them not with stiff bows, but with warm smiles. Later that night, in the quiet of their private sitting room, Anna stood before the fireplace, watching the flames dance. Henry approached her from behind and placed a wrapped parcel on the table beside her. She turned, curious. Inside was a bound journal with a cover of soft navy leather. On the first page, in his handwriting, was a single inscription: "For your words, when the world fails to hear them." Her throat tightened. "I thought it was time you wrote your own stories," he said. Anna looked at him, tears rising to her eyes. "You've seen me," she said, barely able to speak. "I always saw you," he replied. "But now I finally understand what I was seeing." He cupped her face gently, and in that gesture lay everything she had longed for. Not passion alone, not admiration, but something rarer. Belonging, not to a house or to a name, but to a soul. The wind whispered through the eaves, and the fire warmed the silence between them. Anna, once dismissed as plain, once tolerated as a necessity, now stood at the center of a life no wealth could ever build. She had not conquered Newport with diamonds or lineage, but with quiet resilience, steady compassion, and the strength to remain standing when the world tried to push her aside. And now, with the man who had once offered her convenience and now gave her everything, she had built something lasting, not a marriage of appearances, but a home worthy of love. The sea still sang against the cliffs of Newport, but the song had changed, softer, older, wiser. The winds, once sharp with salt and youth, now carried the scent of lavender and thyme. And upon the hill, where wildflowers once bent to the breeze, a new structure stood, white-stoned, sunlit and filled with laughter. The Anna Hayes Sinclair Institute had become more than a school. It was a sanctuary. Children ran through its open courtyards with books in their arms and dreams in their eyes, many of them barefoot, most of them poor, but all of them believed in. At the heart of it all, Anna sat in the library's reading room, sunlight casting golden patterns across her desk. Her dark hair was streaked now with silver gracefully, like moonlight woven into a tapestry. She still wore no jewelry, save for the wedding band Henry had placed on her hand 8 years before. She turned a page in the large journal that sat open before her, one of many she had filled over the years. Her handwriting remained neat, precise, unhurried. It chronicled not only the Institute's founding, but the 1,000 quiet moments that had made up a life worth remembering. From the hallway came the sound of small footsteps, swift and determined. "Mother!" Anna looked up, just as a little boy burst into the room, curls flying, cheeks flushed. "There you are," she smiled, rising to greet him. "What mischief have you been up to, William?" He grinned, gap-toothed and earnest. "Papa let me feed the foals this morning. I think one of them likes me best." "Of course he does," she said, brushing dirt from his collar. "You've a kind heart. Animals always know." Behind them the door opened again, revealing a tall young woman with chestnut hair tied back in a blue ribbon. "William stole 2 apples from the kitchen," said Lillian, now 16, her voice carrying both affection and reproach. "I only borrowed them," William protested, and Lillian rolled her eyes, though with far more fondness than frustration. Anna shook her head, her smile softening. The 2 children left in a flurry of chatter and footsteps, and just as Anna turned to return to her desk, another presence filled the doorway. Henry stood there, older. Yes, the lines around his eyes deeper, his once dark hair dusted with grey, but his gaze held the same unwavering warmth. He walked slower now, with the dignity of a man who no longer rushed toward ambition, but savoured what he had built. "Will you walk with me?" he asked. "Always," she replied. They left the building hand in hand, descending the sloping path toward the bluffs. Below, the ocean stretched wide and endless. The sun had begun its descent, tinting the water with gold. They paused at the same spot where, years ago, he had promised her a forever. "You were right," she said quietly. "This place became something more." He glanced sideways. "You were the more. I only built the walls." They stood for a long while, listening to the wind and to each other's breath. Behind them the Institute hummed with life, testament to what love could plant when sown in wounded soil and watered with courage. Society had changed in 8 years. Subtly but undeniably, the whispers had long fallen silent. Agatha Remington had retired to Europe after her final scandal, a humiliating public withdrawal from the charity board after being exposed for falsifying ledgers. Margaret Wells had married a viscount in London, only to return 2 years later as a bitter divorcee. She no longer appeared at summer balls, but Anna never gloated. She had learned long ago that the finest victories were those not declared, but lived. James, now nearly 13, was away at boarding school. He wrote to Anna weekly, never just, "Dear stepmother," but "to the bravest woman I know." She kept every letter, and William, their child born 5 years after their marriage, was wild and tender and carried both of their strengths. He bore Henry's eyes and Anna's stillness, and every time Henry looked at him, a quiet awe crossed his face. As the sun slipped lower, Henry turned to her. "Do you ever miss the woman you used to be?" Anna thought for a moment. "I miss her loneliness," she said, "because it taught me to treasure this. I miss her silence, because now I have so much to say. And I miss her invisibility, because it made being seen by you mean everything." He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "You saved me," he murmured. "No," she whispered. "We saved each other." Far below, the sea kept singing. But up on the cliffs, surrounded by a family she never thought she'd have, and a legacy she never dreamed to leave, Anna Sinclair smiled. She had not been born to wealth. She had not been chosen by society, but she had been chosen by love. And that had made all the difference. In a world where beauty is often mistaken for worth, Anna's story reminds us that true strength lies in quiet resilience, unwavering kindness, and the courage to love even when it seems impossible. She wasn't the woman society expected. She didn't shine in ballrooms or grace the pages of fashion columns, but she built something far more enduring, a family bound by loyalty, a love born from truth, and a legacy of compassion that changed lives. The plain wife, as they once called her, became the heart of a home, the soul of a community, and the reason a powerful man dared to open his heart again. If you made it this far, write the word forever in the comments, so we know you felt this story all the way to your soul. Your voice helps this channel grow, and every comment, every share, every like helps bring these timeless romances to more hearts around the world. If this tale touched you, share it with someone who believes in second chances, in quiet love, in stories that stay long after the screen fades to black. And don't forget to explore the other historical love stories I've left for you in the cards, each one waiting to steal your breath in a different way. Thank you for listening. May you always be seen for who you truly are and loved, not despite it, but because of it.